When visiting Colonial Williamsburg, of course, there's a long list of historical landmarks and places that our founding fathers were known to have visited.
Settled along the Palace Green in Colonial Williamsburg is the prominent Georgian-style home of one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
Home to perhaps one of the most distinguished founding fathers of them all.
The home of a man that strategically earned a long list of credentials that only lengthened throughout his lifetime and still awards him his stellar reputation today.
Most people he came across literally became increasingly impressed with the man that he was and the things that he stood for.
A member of the House of Burgesses, Attorney General for the colony, Virginia's delegate to the Second Continental Congress, a founding father, mentored and taught future presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe, the first American law professor, a notable scholar, a Virginia judge, a respectable husband, and a friend to many.
He was definitely a man of honor and integrity, and his home in Colonial Williamsburg is a place most will want to see during a trip to the colonial capital.
Located behind the iconic Bruton Parish Church, along the Royal Avenue that leads visitors of Colonial Williamsburg to the Governor's Palace, the home of George Wythe is comprised of fascinating stories, many notable visitors, and plenty of captivating history. My mission for the day would be, first, explore the exterior of the Wythe House and its backyard garden area. I'll then head inside to tour the first floor of the home. From there, I'll discuss just one of the best-known ghost stories from the home. And then finally, learn more about the suspected murder of George Wythe.
A must-do stop when exploring the old city, and today I want to invite you to come along with me to discover and learn more about this historical home that was once occupied by one of the founding fathers of our great nation, George Wythe. Come along with me.
A ticket or annual pass to Colonial Williamsburg will allow you an opportunity to explore this national historic landmark, both inside and out. If you're walking along the Palace Green, you will almost always encounter a group of curious visitors awaiting their turn to tour this colonial home that was lived in by a founding father who was known to be modest and gentle, yet respectfully assertive when the situation required.
It says the mid-18th century building was the home of George Wythe, tutor and friend of Jefferson. Wythe was the first professor of law at an American college and first Virginian signer of the Declaration of Independence. Washington used the house as his headquarters in 1781 before the siege of Yorktown.
Built in the 1750s, the two-story red brick home is symmetrical in its architecture, with two tall chimneys ascending from its moderately sloped shingled rooftop, with its 9 windows incorporated into the home's facade. The home was gifted to George Wythe by his father-in-law as a wedding present in 1755.
Now here I am at the back of the Wythe House, and my visit here today is during the autumn season.
The backyard of the property has a conjectural garden with a brick-centered pathway running straight through it, which leads to the green passageway of the growth-covered pergola that provides comfortable shade at the backside of the estate.
Now I'll finish my walk through the garden area towards the covered pergola, only this time it's summer with all the hedges, shrubs, and the various flowers found at the back of the Wythe House in full bloom, revealing their vibrant colors.
A series of outbuildings lie adjacent to the gardens.
Now this is actually the external kitchen at the Wythe House that was used by the servants of the household. And I'm pretty sure this was one of the servants' living quarters here. Now this building here is now used by Colonial Williamsburg's coopers, who craft barrels, hogsheads, buckets, and other handmade items. Okay, so let's head inside and get an idea of what the inside of the Wythe House looks like. The second story is currently closed, but we should be able to get a nice guided tour of the first floor.
upon entering, noticing the staircase, my mind took me back to my recent documentary on the restoration of Colonial Williamsburg, which focuses on Dr. W.A.R. Goodwin during the years of restoration. Goodwin secured the Wythe House during the restoration years and set up his office on the second floor here. This would have been the staircase he used. A fascinating thing to see after learning so much about Goodwin.
And what you are experiencing is a representation of a very wealthy Virginian home. In fact, only about 2 to 4% of Virginians would be able to afford a home like this, and let alone afford to live in Williamsburg itself. Most of us, the average home is 1 room, dirt floors, no windows. We're comfortable, but of course I've never set foot in here, so I wouldn't know any different, right? But as a guest, you definitely would probably be traveling in that same social circle, which we call the upper gentry class. And most often, the Wythes did a lot of entertaining, so there'd be activities, and could be games, afternoon tea, and either way, the parlor there off to your left and or right, depending on which way you're facing, is the room where all activities were held. Comparable to a family room or living room today by our standards. What is unique is that you probably notice that the furnishings, when not in use, are pushed to the wall. Tables fold, and the chairs are mobile enough to be against the wall. So basically, when not in use, this is what the parlor looks like. But it also lends itself to that flexibility.
Feel free to step on it.
So these, what you're seeing are the popular colors.
But mimicking what it originally looked like?
Absolutely. And if you know, have you ever done wallpaper? Paper anyway, they are in squares. They are not in rolls.
Okay.
So if you've done wallpaper and matching salvage, good luck with that one.
And that's the way, these are in squares as
They
well?
are. So if you want to take a look at the dining room, you're going to be more often invited for the main meal of the day, which is dinner. Served between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, up to 6 courses, some great beverages to go with it, and a lot of conversation.
The room next to the dining room belonged to Mrs. Wythe and served a dual purpose as a bedchamber as well as her office.
This is Mrs. Wythe's office, but it's also a bedchamber, just like almost everything else. You know, it's pulling double duty in the 18th century. Because if you can do more than one thing with a room, by all means, maximize it. So the bed probably makes it pretty clear it's a bedchamber. If you have a lot of guests staying here, gentry families often entertain quite a lot. The upstairs bedrooms aren't enough. Use a downstairs room. However, more than this is a bedroom, it's an office space. That's why we have the desk over there. Mrs. Wythe, as the woman, the lady of the house in the gentry home, is the domestic head of house. So she's using this as her office. She is right there keeping track of everything that we're running low on, we might need to buy for the household, what should we purchase at the market next week, and also making decisions like what food's going to be served, at what time, for how many people each day, what recipe is going to be used in preparing it, things like that. And she runs it all from right here. This office is very strategically positioned in the home because although she makes those decisions, she is not the one who's doing the work. The work is being done by enslaved individuals. And the outbuilding's just out the window. And her office is right here, so she can keep an eye on that.
And on the opposite side of the home lied George's office, with items in the room revealing where he would have went to plan lessons, write academic journals, and manage some of his governmental duties. Pleasant environment for meeting with friends, government officials, and other prominent guests he invited into his home. Spending enough time inside the old Colonial Capital of Virginia will eventually unveil stories from the spirit world, and the George Wythe House has quite a few.
So here we are right in front of George Wythe's house. Plenty of haunted stories happened here.
One of the most famous stories of a recurring ghost thought to inhabit the George Wythe House is that of Lady Anne Skipwith. The story states her and her husband, Sir Peyton, stayed at the George Wythe House and attended a ball at the governor's palace. Her husband was said to have been an unfaithful partner. The night of the ball, in the midst of a heavy night of boozing, he began flirting with Lady Anne's sister. Outraged by her husband's behavior, she fled the mansion, and during her departure in the late evening hour, the heel of one of her red shoes snapped off. This would have only further inflamed the unfortunate ordeal that took place on this eventful evening in Colonial Williamsburg. The story goes, she hobbled down the palace green to the Wythe House, and upon ascending the entrance staircase, the eerie clanking sound of wearing only one heel could be heard, before angrily heading inside to her room for the evening. Differing stories have been told of what happened next. Some details state she died inside the house the very next day. Others claim she was murdered, committed suicide, or some accounts say she actually died months later during childbirth. The ghost of Anne Skipwith is said to haunt the Wythe House. To make the incident even more peculiar, it's recorded that years later after her death, her husband actually married her sister. Local folklore says if you bring a red shoe to the door of the house, knock 3 times and repeat 3 times, "Lady Anne Skipwith, we found your red shoe," you will hear the subtle sound of her clanking shoe on the steps of the stairway. Although haunting spirits are said to linger amongst the rooms of the George Wythe House, this colonial home remains one of Williamsburg's most visited and finest residences. After his wife died, Wythe eventually moved from the home to Richmond, Virginia in 1791, where his life too eventually came to an unfortunate and abrupt end, cloaked with scandal and deceit. His sister's grandson, George Wythe Sweeney Jr., moved in with him in Richmond. It eventually became clear that Sweeney was a thief and a troublemaker, bearing loads of debt due to a gambling addiction, amongst other life issues. He was said to have poisoned George Wythe using arsenic during the breakfast hour. Thereafter, the effects of the poisoning gravely sickened George Wythe, along with others he poisoned. After authorities discovered Sweeney, who was one of the beneficiaries of Wythe's fortune and was attempting to cash checks from Wythe's bank account, he was soon arrested. Unfortunately, Wythe finally succumbed to the poisoning and passed away. Sweeney was quickly charged with his death, although he was later tried and a jury acquitted him of the murder in the end. The murder of George Wythe didn't take place inside his home, but the shocking and tragic end of his life leads some to believe the ghost of George Wythe may have returned to his home here in Colonial Williamsburg to be with his wife, who did spend the final days of her life here. This home, found right off the Duke of Gloucester Street along the Palace Green, is definitely worth the investment in exploration, research, and discovery in your efforts to understand better just one of the founding fathers that made an impact here. His life, his accomplishments, and this unique residence he lived at during a large span of his time spent in Williamsburg during the 18th century is something every visitor to the old city should plan to see when exploring many of the amazing historical landmarks that make up the old city of Colonial Williamsburg.